This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood, and today we are talking pipeline. Not in the abstract either. We're going to be getting very practical, very tactical around what a good pipeline looks like, where most pipelines are broken, how a media sales professional can build a pipeline that drives some real confidence. And I'm talking to a particularly passionate advocate of pipeline, Adam Cadwallader. He is the CEO of Motio. He's a returning guest on the show, and he brings a unique perspective given that he's been a media sales leader, but he's now in the CEO chair for an ASX-listed media business with a national sales team. He's got a very strong point of view on what separates great reps from good ones. And in his view, it all starts with pipeline. So we're going to dive in now. Only other thing that I am making a bit of a mandatory of every podcast is asking you to not like, not subscribe, not do any of the review stuff with the podcast. All I ask is that if you get value, that you share it. Share it in a Slack channel, share it in a Teams group, share it in your sales meeting, share it via a text. Just get the word out for anyone who you think would get value from the podcast. That is all I ask. Now we'll get into the pod.
The first five.
Adam, welcome back.
G'day, mate. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Hey, you're a returning guest here, but for anyone who didn't hear the product versus proposition episode, give us a quick version of your role at Motio and your background in media sales.
Look, I've been doing media sales for a stupid amount of time, probably coming up to 30 years. But I absolutely love it. I've started a business called Motio. We've been going for about 5 years. It was just me and the photocopier 5 years ago. And we've got about a team of 25 here now, which is very, very exciting. And we're in the digital place-based media sector, which is part of the out-of-home sector. So it's great fun, great place to be right now.
Absolutely, it is. Very, very cool formats and assets you guys have. So you flicked me a note on LinkedIn just around the world of pipeline.
Yes. And
I think you said something to the effect of, pipeline is actually what really separates the elite operators from the amateurs. But it does feel like it's something of a misunderstood concept in media sales. Is that a fair assessment? And if so, why do you think that's the case?
Look, I've always had this view that pipeline separates the pros from the amateurs, as you said, right? So it really reveals who's managing their business and who's just riding the proverbial wave. In media sales specifically, pipeline's really misunderstood, as you say. I think it's mistreated, and because of that, it's really undervalued. So, yeah, I guess I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that pipeline can be seen and used as an instrument of truth and lies. But that sits firmly in sales management culture, and I think how people are rewarded around the quality of their pipeline, and that sort of leads to performance. But yeah, it's a hard one to answer, but definitely a great pipeline separates the good from the bad.
Well, I think the thing I like about that sort of line of thinking is that pipeline is the one thing that probably is in your control. Like, I do find there is a tendency to be very good at explaining the reasons why revenue might not be there. The market's soft, market's in decline, competitors are taking share, we lost this deal because of pricing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas pipeline is actually one of those things that, with a bit of discipline, it is the one thing that actually you can control the outcome on. Why, though, mate, do you think that media companies and reps and leaders sort of struggle with pipeline discipline if that's the case?
It's a crazy thing to sort of think through that, but pipeline's often the only instrument that's forward-facing in a sales business, right? So, yes, there of course is some strong scientific or mathematical options that businesses can rely on, but high-quality, finely tuned, reliable pipeline is near on impossible to beat. Pipeline discipline, as you say, is cultural, and there isn't enough time spent on the reward training or understanding around the need for pipeline discipline, I think.
And I guess as a CEO, you've got a different vantage point here too. Like, as a CEO, when you're looking at the metrics of the business, what tells you if your pipeline is healthy versus if it's hollow?
For me, it's super simple. Healthy pipeline's foundational. It's healthy is clear. and has high velocity. That's things that are moving and changing rapidly in my view, and probabilities that match timing. So logical spread across low to mid or high probabilities is really where it's at. A hollow pipeline is bloated, unhygienic, puffy, noisy even, just like my computer right now. But healthy is clear as high velocity is. So, probabilities matching timings, as I said, that logical spread across those probabilities.
The thing that you mentioned there that's interesting, right, is maybe people might think that a bad pipeline is not enough in the pipeline, right? Like we're sort of hoping and praying that everything comes off. But you touched on a key word there of a bloated pipeline, right? Which is a lot of speculative stuff that's just kind of sitting there, and it's there as a bit more of a performative thing. Like, look at all the pipeline I'm building and look at all this great revenue opportunity out there, almost as a tangible sort of marker of all the work the reps are doing. Yeah. And really it seems to be that you've got to calibrate it where it's both. It's actually trimming the fat, but it's also obviously big enough that should some things fall over, you've still got that safety net built in. So maybe let's jump into the main topic.
Media sales mastery.
And let's just start at the top, mate. So what does a great pipeline actually look like? What are the signs of it being healthy, and what are the signs of it, maybe the warning signs of it being a bit off track?
Look, I'm going to do my best to avoid aviation analogies today, Jamie. So this is a very tempting opportunity for me. But I guess from my point of view, a great pipeline is balanced, clean, constantly moving, as I just mentioned. It's functional, not full. It's not the pipes we care about so much as what's in them that counts. So confident pipeline is really the goal. I think the real challenge is there's a lot of pipeline Americanisms out there in CRMs. But for me, the anatomy of a solid media sales pipeline starts with quality relevant opportunities, not more deals, as you mentioned. I think number two maybe is a balanced stage, so distribution that makes sense to you as a salesperson, your sales manager, and probably the team around you. So using the same language across the team, and as I mentioned, in your, chosen CRM is important. I think in our business, we've struggled with this as things can be ambiguous and sometimes, as mentioned, Americanized. So that's important to get right. The third for me is probably really clarity on the next step. So just checking in with people is not really a strategy. Clearly defined actions is probably what keeps the velocity in the pipeline. Weighted value. Yeah, that's always the one that I think, forms sort of the backbone. But forecast with true probability, as I said, hope is also not a strategy, right? Yeah. Get your percentages aligned with the team and make them mathematical. So if I think something is at 10%, you might have a different version of 10%. Don't really know how that's possible, but velocity of it is everything, right? The ops are either progressing or they're leaving the pipe. Constant review is really important. And this is really where we've, created and potentially lost the opportunities, right? Creating breathing space in your pipe is important. So make sure you've got some breathing room. Don't rely on we talk about bluebirds flying in, at the last minute, but don't rely on a big whale or a bluebird coming in to save your month. I think keep things aligned to your budget. Truthful visibility. So I think we all, really understand the concept of sandbagging. So this is probably key to things being off track, as you rightly put out in your question. So a good manager can really spot patterns, blocks, and where the wins are at a glance. So I think make sure your visibility is accurate. It creates a natural red flag for open and quality conversations, and that's really good pipeline culture.
You touched on a point that I hadn't even considered in that answer around like deal stage. Yeah. It's all well and good to have a bunch of stuff sitting at 50%, but is that actually a late stage deal that's likely to drop, or is that something that's 50% likelihood, but we pitched it yesterday? And the added complexity to that, I think, is that sometimes you don't have that linear sales process where you move through 5 or 6 different stages to naturally arrive at a deal. I think of an agency brief, for example, where despite the fact the agency might say the timelines to make a decision are X, these things could just kind of sit out there in the ether with no update for weeks at a time.
Absolutely.
So that to me actually is a really interesting point to hang on. And it maybe does lead into this next problem, which is this whole idea of pipeline inflation. Lots of stuff just sitting in the pipeline, but to your point, not actually moving, not increasing in likelihood, not decreasing in probability, not being moved out. How do you sort of shift that culture of pipeline inflation so that actually the data becomes something that can be trusted, as opposed to having to build this thing that just feels like a proof point of all the work the rep's been doing?
Yeah, bloody hell. I actually don't know why this is a thing, but it is, right? So firstly, the business needs to be focused on one true thing. So, pipeline is what we as salespeople have true control over in our business, as you said in the introduction. Making a great sale in the outcome of great quality and relevant pipeline. So really, we don't really have control over what pops out the end of the pipeline. That's a byproduct of great pipeline is the sale.
And it's funny, we obviously can't control the outcome, but we can control the pipeline. But I think that's an interesting kind of observation you made before, which is like, it's not about number of deals, it's actually about quality of deals, and it's about quality of opportunity.
Yeah, that's hard, right?
It is, and I think it's that type of thing that has to be constantly obsessed over. Like when it comes to building really quality pipeline, not just reporting on it, but actually making a deliberate attempt to go and build a really high quality pipeline. What are those high impact behaviors that a rep should really obsess over to get that end result of a great robust pipe?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I think it's the $1 million question, really. It's the stuff that you cover on your LinkedIn and all of the podcasts. It's all out there. But I think a few things to think about would be, up front, being ruthless in questions. Ask really hard questions early. Obsess about great questions, not questions for questions' sake. I think there's a lot of people out there, I just want to ask 5 questions when a brief comes in or what have you. It's like, just ask the questions you actually need to know the answer for. But make sure you spend time on that. I think build in follow-up. Don't be a pest. If you do a great presentation, respond to a brief, whatever the case, build the follow-up steps in so there's no surprises to the people that have given you the brief. I think this goes for all parts of the process, right? So from the first meeting, build in the follow-up. Hey, how about I give you a call in 2 weeks and we catch up again and review this? Whatever the case is, building the next steps is really important. The to-do list discipline, right? Great reps don't let their days get hijacked by crap. Do your research is probably another one. Be really relevant at all times makes sense, but making sure you're across the client is the very best option. We're relying on agencies to essentially sell on our behalf back to the client in most cases. So at the most basic, everyone's got a website. So make sure you're across at least what's on that before you walk into a situation. I think, one of the things that you and I have been talking about even just in the last few days is the view of personalization. Don't blanket people with the same stuff. But right at the core of it for me is be obsessed with pipeline health, be clean, current, treat it like it's a precision piece of instrumentation, not a bin to put stuff in. So I guess that's probably my, what are the high impact behaviors that I think can people should be obsessing over.
It's funny, I obviously spent a few years at O Media, and I'll call him out. There's a guy called Tom Burden there that worked in sort of the business intelligence function.
Yep.
Really, really good example of deriving really good actionable insight from pipeline. Like, we'd just be able to sit there and be like, look, when you build pipeline against this product, your average close rate is about 20% higher, and it's usually a lot quicker of a close versus this product. Therefore, these are the specific things you can do. And I think that's actually sort of feeding into what you're saying, which is the pipeline isn't just a reporting of all the opportunity out there, but it actually can give you learnings, and you can use it to then optimize moving forward. Like, what is it about these deals that keeps closing? What am I doing in my process that's increasing the probability that I'm going to actually win this business? And that to me does take a bit of time. I think a lot of the time we abdicate that responsibility to the manager.
Yeah.
And I do think that sometimes, managers, myself included, we probably turn into the compliance cops as opposed to the people who actually help influence pipeline quality. It's like, did you put it in the CRM? Is it accurate? Is it up to date? Where's this deal at? What's stopping it?
Yeah.
How do you reckon, maybe we could change that behavior from being correcting into more of a coaching based kind of role around pipeline? Have you seen any examples of that done to great effect?
Well, I think there's probably two parts of this, right? So firstly, we definitely need to train in pipeline, just the same way as we train in every other thing, right? So we've got to understand probability, reward quality and hygiene. We've got to trust, accurate, I guess accuracy should be rewarded, even if it's not the answer we want. As sales managers sometimes, right? We want this, we're hunting towards this budget, but something falls over and people feel nervous to pull it out of pipeline or what have you. We need the honesty and truth in it. And look, media is very dynamic, right? And actually, you and I have worked in big businesses and small businesses, but the smaller your business, the more dynamic and lumpy things can become. Equally, the larger the business, a great pipeline is less reliable. And if big businesses can get those great pipeline pieces from that, we're talking about coaching roles versus correcting, boards can rely on pipeline for their front-facing information, right? And to get that dialed requires really a few what seems to be basic things. So, simply put, help your team to be reliable in pipeline and open with dialogue. Reward great behavior. Use 2 carrots to 1 stick if required. Pipe is cultural. And we need to, it needs to start from the beginning and from the top to get the bottom working really well.
I think it alleviates a lot of budget anxiety when it's done right. There's so much in this role in particular where you live or die by your performance every month. And 15 years of carrying a monthly budget, I think I'm in a position to really speak with a bit of authority on this.
You definitely qualify.
I don't know how I'd adjust to not having a budget, actually, if I'm honest. But I think that it sort of alleviates, that anxiety because you're basically going in saying at the end of the day, I'm just going to turn up and focus on these specific inputs. And therefore, I don't have that volatility necessarily or that kind of anxiety at the end of a month where I'm wondering if I am or I'm not going to make it. And I think importantly, and maybe you've got a perspective on this too, but if things are going to be really ordinary and if the pipeline is telling you that you're going to have a bad quarter or you're going to have a bad month or that you've got a bit of a terminal case with revenue, I would imagine you as a CEO would prefer to be alerted to that a hell of a lot earlier rather than later. Am I right?
Absolutely. I think, the further out you can manage to it, you can manage a whole lot of things. You can manage people's expectation. You can add in resource. There's a whole lot of things that you can do. You can even incentivize different outcomes. But, I think, absolutely getting really high quality information much further out, can change everything.
So here's the area where I always found it challenging because the majority of my career was as an agency sales director, and timelines and control in that transaction do often tend to sit with the buyer a little bit more. You're not putting them through a linear process. It's often that it's briefed out to market. There's an evaluation. There's a renegotiation. Sometimes the brief changes. There's a lot of things that can actually make that piece of business very difficult to feel like you're moving it through a linear process. How do you think, a frontline agency rep should maybe adjust their approach to managing pipeline when maybe they're more in a response-based role and they might be just sort of having a lot of business that's sitting out there that's being evaluated where they're maybe hamstrung? They just feel like all they're doing is waiting for the approval. Is there anything they can do to maybe take a bit more control of that or to get a bit more of a robust pipeline read when that's the scenario?
I think it's a really tough one. I think we say in our business, time kills all deals, right? It's a well-known saying. But if you've built really strong follow-up mechanisms, I guess that's the first thing, build strong follow-up mechanisms.
Yep.
If you've got ideal check-in moments that aren't, sort of surprises. Now, this doesn't always work, textbook, of course, but the more you can do here, the better. So manage to a no surprises scenario is probably how I would have dealt with it back in the billboard days where it's literally war. And you are, it's an all or nothing scenario sometimes. So, those moments to manage to that no surprises scenario is probably the most important thing you can do in a response-based role.
Just reflecting on what you're saying there, one of the things that I used to find could work really well is building in almost like a fear of loss or an opportunity that might be missed as time elapses.
Yes.
Like if you were in a position to approve this before X date, we could thank you in the form of this thing, which starts in the first month of X. And then to your point, that gives you that mechanism to follow up and go, just want to see how this is, progressing, because obviously we've got this, like time is a factor here. That to me was one, but I was like, you can't use that trick all the time.
No.
And that's the difficulties. I mean, sometimes too, like you probably get to a point where I would imagine your relationships are pretty strong with the agencies you transact with. Yeah, you can just go, listen, I need to get a read on this because I've got to do my forecast. Can you give me a steer on where this is sitting?
That's right. And I think, getting to the core of it is about truth and about having open dialogue, not just with your internal teams, but also, as you rightly say, with your great relationships and agencies. But if you're just starting out and you're first developing, your relationships with agencies, I think those check-in moments are really important, and asking people how to check in with them, because these guys are busy. So we need to kind of respect that as well.
One thing I used to find, which was quite surprising initially when I moved into out of home from being in radio for so long, was the approach to pipeline was very different. And I imagine every medium has a slightly nuanced approach. But what I noticed with radio, respectfully, was if you didn't hit your number or if you didn't sell your inventory, you'd have an opportunity cost to bear. Okay, we didn't sell $100,000 of inventory. We had to let that go. That was perishable. We missed that opportunity. I think with out of home, the complexity in the back end of the business made pipeline a lot more high stakes.
Yes.
We have money going out the door irrespective of if we sell this or not. So we're better off selling it, and we have to make really good calibrated pricing decisions, and we need to figure out what levers we have to pull. And we have stakeholders, be it property owners, be it rev share partners, be it other sales agents, be it local councils, governments, that actually need to get a read on how things are performing too. So I feel like out of home actually does this the best, because there is that added layer of commercial pressure to have a really accurate forecast as to where the revenue is coming from and how much.
Yeah, I think, as the pendulum swings back from high yield through to, there's nobody on this board or whatever the inventory is that moment of, well, we have to stop the bleeding, not just, I guess, celebrate the win. It's how do we help that billboard owner? How do we help that property owner lose less? And those things become really, really important. Again, to your point, in a billboard business is, or an out-of-home business is as much about property as it is about media sales. So yes, there are more stakeholders that are reliant upon a really high-quality pipeline than perhaps in another media business.
Going back to that, and I know we're getting really into the weeds here, but
yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. It's actually really good, because what I want to think about is, like, if I'm a rep in my third year of selling, what are some of those signals that I'm going to be getting that a deal is likely to not happen? Like, how do I read that situation if I'm sitting there with some stuff in my pipeline, I'm forecasting I'll probably get to my number? What are the things I need to be aware of that might be sort of showing me that a deal could go south or could not happen?
Yeah, look, I think if I walked out the door here and chatted to a few of the team out here at Motio, they would say things like, well, firstly, they'd say, well, time kills all deals, right? So if it's gone, if it's stale, it's probably not happening. I think we would say ideas keep you on the plan. And so if you've got a really good idea and you're engaged with that idea and the agency's engaged with that idea, then it makes it easier to sort of understand where things are at. That said, lack of responses are a big one. Emails and phone calls and texts going, unresponded to. Other things like when the agency says, and we've all heard it, we're just working through some feedback, or the client has asked if there are any case studies of success with previous brands. Lack of questions from the client is probably also a problem. When the email says, we're looking to share an update by end of week. And I don't mean to be flippant about this, but, sometimes we even get things like the client's flagged creative issues. And those kind of things should be seen as signals to, raise information to maybe your manager or to people around the business that might know this person, that might be able to get more detail and help bring this to fruition. But they're probably, 6, 7, 8 things that, come to mind.
I love it. I mean, I think the underlying sort of message I'm getting here is the deal doesn't stop once you've presented. Really, it's having that almost like that strategic process off the back of presenting, where you have those regular updates, you keep that dialogue, you keep thinking about different potential reasons to re-engage the client just to get those updates. And I think, probably the other thing about pipeline that's probably an interesting thing to discuss is the ambient effect, right? So, I mean, I don't know your business intimately, but I do know some of those environments quite well, where they weren't typically getting briefed. It was really like you had to go and build pipeline against these products because they weren't the default environment on the plan. And what was good about that, though, I always found, was when you built pipeline against those particular products, you weren't really competing. You were sort of in a bit of a blue ocean. But at the same time, you through going out and sort of being very proactive in market and leading with ideas and opportunities and just building pipeline, you'd often then start to make your way onto the reactive brief as well. So is there sort of like this ambient effect of building pipeline that maybe you have a bit of an inside edge if you're on a response-based kind of brief as well?
For me, that's really a simplicity, right? So it's back to I guess the concept that if you've got a great idea, then you're much more likely to sail into the blue ocean area, right? If you're in a response-based brief, if you're in sort of that red ocean, you're in a high competitive situation, that the idea can keep you there. But certainly in our types of business where we're niche audiences at scale, that can really help keep on the brief and keep part of the flow, the natural flow happening, because we're supportive, right? We're really supporting something that might be bigger. We might be able to continue on the opportunity. We might be able to keep that campaign in market when you've spent a lot of money on a sort of a broadcast media. We may be able to, keep things going and keep the fire burning for a lot longer at a lower cost. So it's certainly something that we are, really engage with almost on a daily basis. I love
the idea that ideas are a part of the currency you trade on, because I just think that's just so missing at the moment. Like it's to a point of absolute frustration that the one currency that you can trade off, which creates an amazing value proposition and is very hard to compete against, is great ideas. I've always been a believer that if you've got a competitor on the plan that's really good at ideation, you're in deep shit. Like you've got to have those chops. And radio has always been fantastic at that, right? So they've always been sort of the leader with it, going out with great ideas. So, there's a lot to be learned from the radio industry. Yeah. And I mean, I know you spent time in radio too and radio creative. And I think the reality is that radio methodology of ideas and integration, it's often just remixing inventory to feel fresh and different. Like there's no great plan where somebody has different inventory or different, different things in their toolkit. You all kind of have the same things like sponsorships, live reads, radio spots. So it's even more of a case to say, like, even if your product feels quite one-dimensional, if you've got great ideas, you can actually make the thing feel a lot more multi-dimensional than just a static product. Absolutely. And, I think about some of those, small publishers, the small websites out there, they're working really hard with incredible ideas, but they don't necessarily have the reach to sort of match it. And I think there's a lot of integration opportunities to create, really great quality pipeline across multi-businesses now that, can make a big difference to and outcomes to all businesses and to brands. 100%. And I sort of rounding this out before the listener question, and this is again from the CEO vantage point. Pipeline, we've been talking a lot about it tactically and from a sales performance perspective, but as a CEO, as a publicly listed CEO with different commercial pressures, how does pipeline strength actually influence the broader business play? Like, I imagine you've got to make decisions based on hiring, resourcing. You've got an investor community that you're accountable to. Like, how does pipeline feed into you being effective in all these other facets of the role of running a listed company?
Yeah, look, I guess all of my answers that we've talked about today is that, the pipeline strength is one of the most strategically important signals a business has, right? So far beyond just sales forecasting, a credible, really well-managed pipeline informs decisions at pretty much every level of the company. It's an organizational compass, right? So for me, it actually includes things like, as you say, hiring and resourcing. So guides me to kind of when to scale teams or avoiding over or under hiring, as we were talking about before. Operations, delivery, how do we plan for capacity, service readiness, infrastructure. Financial forecasting is probably the biggest one, right? So it helps plan capacity, as I just said, but also supports cash flow, budgeting, even things like marketing or, entertainment spend, it can change that outcome. But right at the core of it's investor and board reporting, right? So it builds confidence in growth, validates forward guidance, signals market momentum. I guess the bottom line is pipeline's really organizational foresight, not just a sales tool, but often a strategic lever even. So it's a really important part of how I operate, that's for sure.
And if you think about bringing that back to that frontline seller, just think about what you're hearing here, right? You might be looking to get a sales coordinator in your team. You might be wanting additional client engagement budget. You might want to go and do a trip to take a client on a site tour. You might be wanting a pay review. You might be wanting some cool new offices and digs. Like, all of these things are sort of within your sphere of influence if you can actually focus on building great pipeline, because you're giving the business confidence and visibility and the ability to make those decisions rather than probably being cautious or sort of having to tighten the purse strings. So I think particularly in the current environment, it's one of those things where really think about it. If you're wanting to level up in your career, this is a really good thing to think about. What's the pressure of the CEO look like, and how does my role actually ladder up to that?
I totally agree. And I think that, if we can teach that from the beginning, if we can, we're bringing it in from the beginning, those things become, cultural and a change. And it's something that we need to change in our industry, because it is something that's a tool and this instrument that we can use for greatness. And as I keep saying, our job is not to sell stuff. It's to build great quality pipeline. That is the byproduct, is to sell stuff. So it's a pretty exciting, it's kind of a boring thing that could be exciting, I guess.
Well, and it's funny. I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with the national sales director, and he made a really interesting point, which was, our issue isn't necessarily that the revenue isn't performing well. It's that these massive bookings come out of nowhere and no one had a clue they were coming in.
Yeah, no,
and
that's exactly right.
He goes, look, it's a nice problem to have, Jamie. I'd rather it than the reverse. But we have no credibility as a sales team that we're across our forecast or our pipeline. We've got no idea because we're just having these massive bookings drop out of the sky that nobody knew. And there's going to be a day where they don't come because we don't know why they're coming. We don't have the ability to influence them. And if they don't happen, we miss our number. So the reverse is also true. Like, yes. I think there's a tendency the pipeline starts to fall by the wayside when the market's hot, when you get a few wins, when the team really have momentum. It's that focus on really maintaining that discipline and holding your nerve and doing the boring stuff when the times are good that actually does pay the dividend too.
Absolutely.
Listener question time.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
Hi, Jamie. I sell for a lifestyle magazine focused on the restaurant industry. We're a premium title, and part of my bonus each month is linked to selling on yield, i.e. not dropping below discount thresholds. The problem is, in the final week before deadline, sales managers panic and get us to push distress. Even when I'm on or close to budget, selling this stuff drops me below yield. How can I fix this? Seems like the problem stems from bad forecasting, bad compensation design, or dare I say, finance being happy to withhold my comms.
You can just hear the frustration in that one, can't you?
I think, firstly, I don't know a salesperson that's worked in media in the last, whatever years, that probably hasn't had a similar scenario, right? So, look, Okay, this person's really being penalised on yield when panic-driven last-minute discounts are being pushed, right? So even if you hit or close to budget, this is really creating a misaligned incentives and it's undermining this person's role, which is kind of sad. So I guess poor forecasting leads to last-minute pressure, firstly, and that's sort of sitting in the core of this. Commission structure is rewarding volume over value potentially. Doesn't sound like finance and sales are aligned on long-term yield protection. So I guess, how to fix it, right? So present the data or data. I don't know what people say these days, but I guess showing how last-minute discounts can erode yield and of course the commission, even when performance can be actually really strong. I think it's an opportunity for this person to reframe the issue. So this isn't just about their pay. It's actually about protecting the brand and fixing broken incentives. I think proposing sort of solutions of tiered commission or separate distress inventory from standard budget, improving forecasting accuracy with earlier checkpoints, better pipeline. I would say this is a classic scenario that the incentive model is not rewarding the right behaviors and needs to focus on pipeline management, which I love to finish on.
I think you articulated that perfectly. The other sort of thing that I'm getting from this, which might not be obvious straight away, is there's an issue with pricing straight up, right? Like you're clearly trying to drive a price point that's not sustainable in the market. You're not generating the revenue required, and therefore you're trying to hold yield until the last minute, and then you're dropping anchor. So to me, I kind of look at it and go, this misalignment in pricing or your incentive being linked to pricing, I think we just need to go back and look at the rate card and or the pipeline in tandem and go, how do we get a little bit better at actually avoiding this scenario where we need to try and convert revenue in the last week of the month? Because that to me just feels like you're probably trying to push the premium a little too high.
Yeah, and I guess if you've got really honest, truthful, hygiene-based pipeline, you're having that conversation a lot further out before you're getting to the end of the quarter even. But, you're being able to talk about that with your sales manager and going, the pricing's wrong. We need to fix this so we don't have distress. Maybe we can increase our volume rather than just our yield. So, I think there's a few issues there, but yeah, it's a great problem to try and solve.
It is indeed. Well, mate, we've got a closing question before we sort of get a bit more info on how to connect with you. And this is just really simple, like practical and tactical. If I'm a media salesperson navigating the first few years of my journey and Adam could teach me one thing about pipeline that I can take away and apply immediately, what would it be?
Look, hopefully what I've said today makes sense, but the quality of your pipeline is really a reflection of the quality of your thinking, right? So don't chase everything. Don't confuse activity with progress. Great reps build pipeline full of real opportunities because they qualify hard, they follow up with intent, they think critically about where their time matters most. So I guess master that and everything else, forecasting, closing, growth, it follows naturally.
I love that. Well, thank you, mate. Thanks for coming on again. I know you've always been such a vocal supporter of Media Sales Mastery.
You're doing such an amazing job. And, it's if you're in a sales role, in a media sales role anywhere in this country and you're not listening to this and reading your LinkedIn updates, you're crazy. But, as I say, we don't always agree on everything, but I think we're on the same page. It's great.
I appreciate that, mate. Funnily enough, I was in I'm going to South Africa next week, but I had actually a couple of people even as far as Namibia say that they listen. So we're reaching a broader audience in Australia, which has been very, very cool.
I've got a good following in Namibia.
Yeah, you do. You're actually single-handedly driving all of our Western African listenership, I think, mate. So thank you for
that. Terrific.
But one more thing, actually, because again, we are reaching great media sales people in Australia who are probably on the hunt for their next gig. What's on the agenda for Motio? Tell us about 2025.
Firstly, I think 2020, this financial year, we're just wrapping up. So we work on a financial year basis. We've had a great year. Our team's done an incredible job. This next year is really for us probably boring, but it's really about profit, about how do we actually fund ourselves to grow bigger. So we're looking at a lot of really cool opportunities. Obviously difficult to talk about when you're in a public environment, but certainly we're very excited about the next 12 months. We're probably about to sort of launch our next 3-year strategy to our team in the next month. So we're pretty excited about that. Obviously Move 2.0 is coming up, which we're super excited about because unlike some of the other outdoor companies that are on Move 1.5, the place-based area, regional billboards, things like that are not in the measurement system. So it's a big deal for us. So there's a lot of really exciting things coming up, not just for Motio and for the place-based industry, but for the out-of-home industry at large.
I love that, mate. Well, that's a good tease. You've given away nothing commercially sensitive, but I would say that a little bit of money in some Motio shares is probably wisely spent. I think you're an incredibly undervalued company on the ASX at the moment, and
it's always a good day to invest in Motio, James.
It's always a good day, exactly. Well, Adam, thanks for your time today, bud, and have to get you back here sooner rather than later.
My pleasure, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.